received Pastor Taylor the wisdom as he's teaching and preaching today. Please help us to have a good rest of the day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. You may be seated. So, Emmanuel, I didn't turn that on. Did you? We're good? Okay. All right, so we are continuing our study in New Testament prophecy, and we're at Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. We kind of started Revelation 11:19 last week, but, it's a simple verse, and yet at the same time, there are some very interesting things in the verse that we could probably pull some pretty good stuff out of. So I want to read that, and then we'll talk about a couple of points in there. Revelation 11:19 says, "And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and a great hail." And last week, I think we talked about the temple of God, and here, as it says, there was a temple of God opened in heaven. So we talked about that a little bit. But we didn't really get a chance to talk about the ark of his testament. And so I kind of wanted to look at some things concerning that. First of all, when it says the ark of the testament, it's not talking about Noah's ark, okay? It's talking about the ark of the covenant. We call it the ark of the covenant usually today. You'll hear people speak of it in that way. And basically it was a box that was overlaid with gold, and it had two cherubim on the top. And the priest would carry it around on what the Bible calls staves, which are basically long poles. The interesting thing about that is that those poles were never to be removed from the rings that were in the corners of the Ark of the Covenant. And so no one ever really needed to touch the Ark of the Covenant, which was a good thing not to touch it, because if you remember in the Old Testament, a guy touched it, and what happened? Does anybody remember what happened to him? Yeah, he died. And David was not too happy about that, and God had to change his attitude. So John mentions the ark of his testament, and he says that it is in the temple, which is in heaven. There is mentioned in no other book except the book of Revelation this fact. This is the only place where it's at. In fact, it's only mentioned twice in the New Testament altogether. The other place is in Hebrews. So let's just look at one of those. In Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 4. And Emmanuel, would you read that for me, sir? Hebrews 9:4. Yeah, verse 4.
Which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant.
All right, so the writer of Hebrews is actually just reviewing for us things that were found in the tabernacle. And of course, he mentions the Ark of the Covenant. He also tells us what was in it. He says that there was a golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant that was in it. And so that was in the earthly ark, that was in the earthly tabernacle, if you will. So even that reference in Hebrews, it's speaking more of a historical perspective concerning the Old Testament priest and what they would see when they went into the Old Testament tabernacle. But as far as the ark being in heaven, this is the only place where that is really spoken of. And so Revelation 11:19 being the only reference which speaks of the ark being in heaven. The history of the ark in the Old Testament is very clear. It's very clear all the way up to the Babylonian invasion, when the Babylonians went into Jerusalem and they invaded Jerusalem, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the history of the ark is pretty clear up to that point. Then suddenly it's at that point where nobody really knows what happened to the ark. And if you're the inquiring mind likes to know kind of person, and you start doing a little research to see what people think about it or say about it, you're going to find a number of theories. I read about 20 different web pages on that, and I picked the ones that were repeated the most often, and I'll just throw these out to you. And I'm not saying, by the way, that the ark is in any of these places. By the time we get done, I'll just tell you up front, I don't think the ark exists anymore. Okay?
Other than heaven?
Other than the one that's in heaven, yes.
Yeah.
Now remember, just kind of reviewing back, remember what we covered when we were talking about the tabernacle, that God, when God gave Moses the instruction for the tabernacle in the Old Testament, and he emphasized that Moses make it according to the pattern which he had seen. So it seems like in every passage where that is referred to, it seems like that not only did God tell Moses what to build and how it had to be built and the dimensions and all of that, it seems like God actually showed Moses what it was supposed to look like too. And I pointed out that would be very helpful because when you get the ark, for example, the ark, he's told to make it by certain dimensions, and it's got to be made this way, and it's got to be overlaid with gold, and it's got to have rings in the corners, and it's got to have these cherubim that go on top. And so Moses, having never seen a cherubim, would probably go, I wonder what that's supposed to look like. But if he actually saw what it was supposed to look like, he could do a better job at it. So I think God actually showed him as well as told him. So anyway, back to these theories. The first one is, and these are not in any particular order, except I saved the best for last. So the first one is that the ark is in a place called Roslyn Chapel. Anybody hear of Roslyn Chapel before?
Area 51 or something?
Well, no, Roslyn Chapel. It's a 15th century Anglican chapel in southern Scotland. And I'm not recommending that you go watch this movie, but it was featured in the Da Vinci Code, which is about as blasphemous of a movie as you can get. So don't go see it. But anyway, apparently it was in that movie. I watched it because I was doing a critique of it for a Bible college class that I took. I made it like a third of the way through, and I said, I can't do this anymore. So I wrote down some things in my notes and then just told the professor, I said, I'm sorry, I couldn't watch the rest of it. It's just too heretical. It just made me mad. And he said, yeah, okay. So anyway, according to legend, the Knights Templar, anybody hear of those guys? Freemasons. They had the ark, and there's nothing saying where they found it or how they found it, but they took it to Roslyn Chapel. So one of the theories is that it is somewhere in Roslyn Chapel. Another one I thought was interesting is Mount Zurugi. Anybody ever hear of Mount Zurugi? Does it sound like it's in America?
Is it like Turkey or someplace?
No? Okay. A man named Masanori Takane, he's a Japanese guy. He's basically the Japanese equivalent to Indiana Jones. And he noticed some similarities between the Bible and the Japanese chronicles of myths and legends. And so he concluded that the ark was on Mount Zurugi in Japan. And it's been looked for a lot. They've searched all over the place and never found it. How it would have gotten to Japan is anyone's guess. There's another one. Okay, the next one is it's in the Temple of Edfu. I don't know who named it. It wasn't me. Edfu, which is an ancient Egyptian temple in southern Egypt. There's an ark there today, and visitors can walk by and even touch it if they want to. Yeah, that's probably not it either. We know what happens when you touch the ark, right? Okay, next theory. Antakya, which is a city in southern Turkey. Yeah. Yeah, it's in southern Turkey. Muslim legend points to the ark as being there, but of course they've never found it there either, right? Chartres Cathedral in northern France. And supposedly in 1118 AD, the Knights Templar were digging under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and they found the ark, and so they took it to Chartres Cathedral in northern France. And again, no one's ever found it there. That's just the legend of where it was. Another one I thought was interesting. There's a group of people in Zimbabwe. It's a tribe called the Lemba tribe. And the Lemba tribe, they actually did DNA testing, and the Lemba tribe can be genetically traced back to the Kohathites in Israel, okay, which was a priestly tribe, or priestly, a part of the tribe of Levites. Okay. Anyway, supposedly they have an ark, but it's on display for people to see, but nobody can touch it. Okay. And so they actually they run around with the little what do they call that? The yarmulke. They wear the yarmulke, and they do the whole Israel thing. Anyway, so there's that. And then one of the better ones is it's written about in the book of Maccabees, which is not a book of the Bible. It's part of what is called the Apocrypha. And it's got some historical value, but it's got no theological value. In fact, it's got some things in it that's theologically inaccurate. Okay. However, in the book of Maccabees, it's written that God told Jeremiah to hide the ark on Mount Pisgah, where Moses died, or Moses saw the promised land, I should say. And supposedly he took the ark and he put it in a cave there, and he sealed it up. And somebody said, well, how's anybody going to find it? And Jeremiah said, well, ain't nobody supposed to find it until the time that the Lord, desires for it to be used again, basically. And so on Mount Pisgah. And it's been searched for all over the place, and no one's ever found it.
Who put it there?
Supposedly Jeremiah.
I know that in Jeremiah, it's also darkly mentioned in Jeremiah too.
It is. It is. Where are we at? Okay. A place in Ethiopia called Aksum has a church called the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. I guess, if you're going to name a church, let's pick a long one, right? So, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. According to legend, the son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, so Solomon apparently and the Queen of Sheba got together. They had a son. And he took the ark because at that time King Manasseh was a wicked guy and he didn't think that he deserved it. So he took it, and he took it back to Ethiopia. And it's hidden and guarded there, and you can't see it. They've got one guy, by the way, that I've seen a documentary on this where he's a young guy, and he gives his whole life to that. That's all he does, his whole life, to stands guard over this ark that no one's ever seen. Anyway, there are some real problems with that because, first of all, the legend never really came into existence until many, many years later. And supposedly this king was talking about how he was supposed to get the throne, and somebody else said, no, not you. And so he came up with this story that kind of proved that he was actually the guy that should have the throne. And so he came up with this legend, and they've looked at the legend, and the timing doesn't match up at all. And so that's probably just a story. Another one is that the ark is still somewhere under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Some believe that it's actually hidden under the Temple Mount somewhere. And as the story goes, when the United Nations gave Israel back to the Jewish people, one of the generals, one of the big wigs that was in charge at the time, decided to allow the Muslims to maintain control of the Temple Mount. His reason for doing that was because he knew that the Jews were going to probably come in and destroy the mosque that's up there, and really provoke big time wars between the Jews and the Muslims, and he didn't think they could handle that. So he said, okay, you guys can protect it. Now Israel owns the mount, but it's under Palestinian control at this point. Okay, so that was his thinking. Well, years later, some rabbis and Jewish scholars and archaeologists started digging, and they dug underneath the Temple Mount, and supposedly they found the ark, but then the Muslims rushed them out of there and sealed everything up, and no one's allowed to get back in there. There's a big problem when you got a story that you can't produce any evidence for. And it always ends with something like, yeah, I saw it, but, I don't have any clear pictures, or, it's like the Bigfoot legends, or the UFO things. With all the cell phones that we've got and all the cameras in the world, we still can't seem to get a good picture. Has that ever struck you as being a little weird? Anyway, moving on. Another legend is that it is actually in the Sea of Galilee. This legend comes from a Muslim legend that says that the ark would rise up out of the Sea of Galilee. And you might be wondering now, why do the Muslims care about the ark? Understand that the Muslims hold the Old Testament to having great value because they go back to Abraham through Ishmael. That's their lean on life, and that's what they teach. And so, a lot of the stuff that we read about in the Old Testament, they accept as fact. They just don't accept as fact that the promise should have been not through Ishmael, but through Isaac. Okay? So they've got a legend saying that it's in the Sea of Galilee, and at the appointed time, when God is ready, it's going to actually float up to the surface, and I guess they'll start using it after that. Another legend, I don't know if the movie came first or if the legend came first, but supposedly it's in a government facility somewhere, like an Area 51 or hangar, or what was that? A warehouse, what was that show? Warehouse 13 or something like that. Anyway, because it's too powerful and too dangerous to be in the hands of mere mortals. Okay? Another legend, or another theory, is possibly it's nowhere. It was probably destroyed by the Babylonians, and I kind of believe that one myself. Okay?
Gold.
Yeah, why? Jeremiah chapter 52. I want to read verses 17 through 22. Jeremiah 52, verses 17 through 22. Understand that what Jeremiah is doing here is he's making a list. He's talking about what the Babylonians did when they came in and they destroyed the city and all the stuff they carried off. And so I'm going to read verses 17 through 22. I want you to notice the things that are listed. Okay? And so it says this, starting in verse 17. Also the pillars of brass that were in the house of the Lord, and the bases, and the brazen sea that was in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans brake, and carried all the brass of them to Babylon. So first of all, the Chaldeans, which are the Babylonians, they went into the temple mount, or temple, and they took the brass, the things that were brass, and they broke it up. All right? And they carried that away to Babylon. Verse 18. The cauldrons also, the shovels, the snuffers, the bowls, the spoons, and all the vessels of brass wherewith they ministered took they away. And the basins, and the fire pans, and the bowls, and the cauldrons, and the candlesticks. That would have been the big Jewish menorah. That was the only candlestick that was in there. The spoons, the cups that were of gold, in gold, and that were of silver and silver, took the captain of the guard away. So they carried all of that stuff away to Babylon. Verse 20. The 2 pillars, 1 sea, and the 12 brazen bowls that were under the bases, which King Solomon had made in the house of the Lord, the brass of all the vessels was without weight. And concerning the pillars, the height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and the fillet of 12 cubits did compass it, and the thickness thereof was 4 fingers. It was hollow, and the chapiter of brass was upon it, and the height of one chapiter was 5 cubits, and a network and pomegranates upon the chapiters round about. All of the brass, the second pillar also, and the pomegranates were like unto these. So Jeremiah writes, and he talks about how the Babylonians came into the temple, and they broke up a bunch of the really big stuff to carry away, and then they carried away all of the little stuff. What's not mentioned? The ark. So they go into captivity for 70 years. After 70 years in captivity, King Cyrus comes along, and King Cyrus kind of, had a soft spot toward the Jews, and there's some historical reasons why. You should search that out. It's pretty interesting. But he decides to allow the Jews to return and to rebuild the city and the temple and the wall. And so what does he do? In Ezra chapter 1, verses 7 through 11, he sends them back, and we're given another list. Ezra chapter 1, verses 7 through 11. And it says, Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Mithridath the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them, 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 9 and 20 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and the other basins 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them in the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Now, in the list in Jeremiah and in the list in Ezra, what is not mentioned? The ark. It's not mentioned. So, if the Babylonians took the ark, I'm thinking that Jeremiah would have probably wrote that down, because every time in the Old Testament somebody takes the ark, it's a big deal. But he never writes that. So there's no mention of the ark. So the logical conclusion is that either it was hidden by Jeremiah or it was destroyed. Or, the last theory, and that takes us back to Revelation 11:19.
Can I read the other thing in Jeremiah where he writes about the ark in chapter 3?
Yes.
The Lord's, let's see here, in chapter 3.
You just found it and just lost it, huh? And they say that that's the kind of stuff that happens when you get old.
3:16, that's right.
All right?
And it says, then shall it come to pass when ye be multiplied and increased in the land, in those days, said the Lord, they shall say no more, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, neither shall it come into mind, neither shall they remember it, neither shall they visit it, neither shall that be done anymore.
All right, so.
So at that time, it was, and later it will not be.
Right, exactly. So there is good indication that it wouldn't exist.
So I don't know from A to B in there somewhere.
Somewhere in there. All right, so as a result of Revelation 11:19, there are a number of Bible scholars and various teachers who believe that the ark, that somehow God just kind of took the ark to heaven, okay? Of course, we cannot know for sure. It's not written anywhere. But it just seems to me that if the earthly tabernacle was built off the pattern of heavenly tabernacle, then the earthly ark was most likely built off of the pattern of the heavenly ark. So the ark would have already been there. There's no need to pull it up there and put it there if it was already there. Does it even still exist? Well, with all the theories, nobody's been able to produce one shred of concrete proof of anything. And, people have been looking all over for it for a long, long, long time. And I just don't personally think it exists. If they find it someday, I won't be, I won't go, oh man, I'm so sad I was wrong. I'll be like, oh yay, fantastic. But I just don't think so. Yes?
I happen to remember the one that you read was Revelation. It did list Aaron's rod and so forth. Or in Hebrews, rather.
That's in Hebrews, yes.
And that's talking about in heaven?
Right, well, no, that's talking about the one that's in the Old Testament. The interesting thing about that passage in Hebrews 9 is the writer of Hebrews, and I believe it was Paul, when he writes, he says, and there was this and this and this and this, and these things that we cannot now speak of very particularly. In other words, those things existed, but not right now, and so I really can't speak, in depth on, that issue much more. So it's kind of interesting the way he puts that across. But in Revelation 11:19, it mentions the ark. And then the last point that I wanted to make from Revelation 11:19 is that John also saw and heard lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. If you read the verse carefully, it doesn't lead you to believe that these things were actually in the temple. They might have been, they might not have been. The whole point is not where they are, but that they occurred. That's the whole point. They occurred. And John was a witness to it. Lightnings and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. John saw it. I like to say it this way. At the end of Revelation chapter 11, John saw a storm coming. Some big things are about to happen, which is what will happen after we get through the next parenthetical section. So that takes us to chapter 12. And in Revelation chapter 12, we have, from chapter 12 through chapter 14, we have the third parenthetical interlude. And I've referenced parenthetical interludes before. What does that mean? What is a parenthesis? What does it do? What's the purpose of a parenthesis? Okay, to give us some clarification of something. What else? By means of clarification, usually adding information that we didn't see somewhere else or that we need to think of in the same context. So this is the purpose of parentheses. Now in this particular parentheses, from chapters 12 through 14, the first thing we come to are 7 wonders. Isn't that interesting? 7 wonders, and that is in chapters 12 and 13. And you know, we've already pointed out the book of Revelation has a lot of 7s. And so in your mind, think of some of the 7s. What do we have? 7 what?
7 bowls.
7 what?
Bowls.
Okay, 7 vials. What else? 7 trumpets. Yes.
7 seals.
Okay, the 7 sealed book. Anything else? 7 stars in Jesus' right hand.
Oh, yeah.
7 candlesticks.
7 crowns.
7 crowns. 7 crowns?
Are you guessing?
I don't know about that one. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't remember reading that. Yeah, but there's lots and lots of 7s in the book. Lots of 7s. 7 what?
Thunders.
7 thunders. 7 spirits. 7, 7, 7, 7. Do you think that was an accident? You think it's coincidence? 2, 3, maybe. But when you got that many 7s, it's not a coincidence, all right? There is a purposeful use of 7 in the book of Revelation. Now, I'm not big on numbers in the Bible. I think numbers might be used to illustrate a truth, but not to teach one. You know what I mean by that? I believe that it's illustrating something here. Somebody said that 7 was the number of God's perfection or something of that nature. I'm not much into all of that, but there could be something to be said there. But here we have 7 wonders. And so I'm going to give these to you, what the 7 wonders are, and then we'll go through and study each one. So the first wonder is the woman in the beginning of chapter 12, who we find out is Israel. Then you have the dragon, which turns out to be Satan. The man-child, which is Christ. Then there is a war in heaven. Then you have the first beast rising up out of the sea in chapter 13. Then a second beast that rises up out of the earth. And then finally the lamb and the 144,000, which is mentioned after that. So, we should also take note that these 7 parenthetical wonders span a very large scope of time. It's not limited to just the tribulation period. All right? For example, the woman is Israel. Where did Israel get its beginning? This is like spiritual Jeopardy. Dun, 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 dun. Where does Israel start?
Jacob.
Okay, why do you say Jacob?
Because he wrestled with God and then God changed his name to Israel.
Okay, very good. Yeah. So, how old are you? 11? You guys just let an 11-year-old shame you. Right. He gave the best answer, okay? A lot of people go back to Abraham, but actually doesn't really start with Abraham. Abraham was Abram. His name got changed to Abraham. Then he had Isaac. The promise came through Isaac, but not to Isaac. Then it goes to Jacob, who wrestles with an angel. And the angel says, "What's your name?" And Jacob says, "I'm Jacob. I'm the deceiver." And the angel says, "Not anymore. Now you're Israel," which means the Prince of God. Okay? So, to be very accurate, that's where Israel starts. It starts back with Jacob. And so, yet, when we speak of the woman, and I'll get into this a little bit more, there are some things in the wonder or the vision of the woman, which not only points to it being Israel, but it actually goes all the way back to Joseph. And we'll see that as we get into there, okay? And so it spans a big realm of time for the woman. It's not just a tribulation period. Same thing is true with the dragon. There's a war in heaven. The dragon gets kicked out. That goes all the way back to, the very beginning when the devil was found in the Garden of Eden and that sort of thing. So there's a big span of time with the dragon. The man-child, which of course is Christ. And so, that takes you all the way back to 4 BC at least, because the woman gives birth to the man-child. And so, again, a big span of time. Then you have the first beast and the second beast and the lamb and the 144,000. And those are a little bit more limited to the tribulation period. But the first, 1, 2, 3, the first 3 are specifically large spans of time. All right? So the purpose of the parentheses is to explain more concerning the personality and the character of these 7 wonders, and not just so much about the time frame in which they're in. Okay? So we need to keep that in our minds, because if you're trying to do a chart, which Brother Carey has asked me to do a chart, and I'm working on it. I just don't have it completed yet. Kind of been busy the last few days. But, you can't really put this on the chart because it goes way too far into the past and, also way up into the future. And so that's difficult to put on the chart. So, large span of time. So let's consider each one of these, and we'll start with the woman in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And it says, "There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered." Now, most everyone agrees that the woman is not a literal woman. I mean, I have not read where anybody said it was a literal woman. Why? This is an easy answer.
She was clothed with the sun.
Okay, you just don't put on a sun. What else? Along with the other stuff, stars and all of that stuff. But the big indicator is that it is a vision. It's not a literal woman. So everybody agrees it's not a literal woman, but not everybody agrees exactly who the woman is. Okay? Everyone says it's something else or someone else. But with that being said, there's a number of ideas as to who the woman symbolizes. And if you like to study on prophecy and that sort of thing from time to time, I wouldn't want you to, don't get distracted by it. A lot of people, they get into the area of prophecy and that's all they ever study. And they never see anything else, and everything is prophecy, prophecy, prophecy. Now, prophecy is one of 8 major doctrines in the Bible. So you need to know it, but it's only one of 8, okay? So make sure you spend some time studying the other 7, because that's important too. But when you read about these books and stuff, about the, especially about the woman, you're going to find some certain theories on who this woman is. And it's not uncommon to find the woman being used in the Bible to stand as a representative of something else. I was just thinking about in, I think it's Revelation chapter 3, in the church of Thyatira, I think it is, the church of Thyatira. Jezebel is mentioned there. Right? Yes? Am I right? Jezebel, sir? Do you think that is Jezebel? If it is, she'd be pretty old and she came back to life, because in the Old Testament she got thrown out of a window and died. Okay? So a woman sometimes in Scripture symbolizes something else. How about the church? Is the church symbolized by a woman? Yeah, the bride of Christ, right? Okay, so a woman can symbolize the church. The woman also can symbolize Israel. In the Old Testament, Israel is called the wife of God. The last time I checked, a wife is a woman. I know nowadays they can say that a wife can be something else, but in the Bible, wife is always a feminine word. Okay, Hebrew and Greek both have specific genders. It's always a girl, just to let you know. Okay, so a woman can symbolize other things in Scripture. Sometimes she's used that way. And if you have a vision where there's a woman in the vision, chances are good that it is symbolic of something else. And so one of the more popular views is that the woman symbolizes the church. But there's a problem with that. What would the problem be? Critical thinking?
Where are we at?
Talking about what the woman symbolizes.
In this case,
Some people say that she symbolizes the church. I say there's a problem with that. What would that problem be?
The churches cannot enter into the seven tribulation. The church already just went up to heaven.
Okay. Well, you might have a point there. That's not what I thought about, but what else?
How the church would have, her feet on the moons and stuff too, whatever.
Okay, well, they have their little twist on that, but all right.
Pastors and deacons are made of men.
Pastors and deacons, what?
Are men.
Pastors and deacons are men. That's true.
You have to fit the 12 stars somewhere. I don't know what that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is that the original?
Well, how about this? What does the woman do in the passage? What is the main thing that she does here? Yeah, she has a baby, and that baby is who?
Messiah.
So does Jesus come out of the church? No. Does Jesus come out of Israel?
That's right.
Yes. You see, it's just basic, simple Bible doctrine at this point. As you're looking at it, it's kind of easy to kind of figure out. So that is one of the popular views, that the woman symbolizes the church. But the scriptures teach that Christ built the church. He said that. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So he does not in any way or fashion, you can't even spiritualize this, to say that somehow Jesus came out of the church. And by the way, the child that this woman gives birth to is clearly Jesus. You read through the rest of Revelation chapter 12, you can come to no other conclusion but that this man-child is Christ because of the things that's said about him. He ascends up to the throne and, sits at the right hand of the Father and that kind of thing. Who else is that going to be? It's not going to be the Apostle John. You see what I'm saying? So it's clearly Jesus. So there's a problem there. The man-child, which is easy to interpret, is said to come from the woman. Look at verse 5, Revelation 12:5. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So clearly the man-child's Jesus. Jesus doesn't come from the church. Jesus did, however, come from Israel. All right? He was born out of Israel. The most logical interpretation then is that the woman symbolizes the nation of Israel. And remember I said it kind of goes back to Joseph in this, right? So turn to Genesis 37. I need a volunteer to read two verses. Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10. Who wants to volunteer? You want to you volunteering? All right, let's get there. Genesis 37, verses 9 and 10.
And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon, and the 11 stars made
Obeisance.
obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth?
Now there's some interesting facets to this dream that Joseph has, right? What are the similarities between that and the woman in Revelation chapter 12?
Sun, moon, stars.
Okay, sun, moon, and stars. How many stars?
12 stars, 11.
So it's 11 in Joseph's dream, but there's 12 in Revelation chapter 12. Why? Yeah, it didn't count Joseph. So 11 plus 1 is 12. That's easy to figure out. I like you. You know what? I really do. I like you. You're good at math. I want to keep you around. Yeah. So there are some great similarities. The woman in Revelation 12 is very reminiscent of Joseph's dream. And in Joseph's dream, very clearly in the interpretation of that dream is that that was referring to Israel, because what does Dad say? Who do you think you are, you little whippersnapper? You think Mom and Dad and your brothers and so forth were all supposed to bow to you? They understood very well what it meant. So the woman in Revelation 12 is Israel. All right? Any questions on that before we move on? Good. Because usually you get stuff like this, the questions are hard. So we'll move on to the dragon. Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. And we'll just kind of give a precursory thing on this because I can't get through this in 3 minutes. So Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. There appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So John writes about another wonder. The Greek word for wonder is the word semeion, which implies something that is miraculous, something that's a sign. So just as the woman is not a real woman, the dragon is not a real dragon. What is a real dragon?
Satan.
What?
Satan, devil.
Okay, yeah, that's true. But I mean, the animal dragon.
Are you talking about Komodo?
A what?
No.
Okay, doesn't exist anymore.
A dinosaur.
A dinosaur that breathes fire, right? It was a real creature. I mean, you know, in the book of Job, it talks about Leviathan, and you read the description. It sounds like a dragon to me when I read it. You know, I mean, he sneezes and fire comes out of his nose, and you know, he's got scales and so on and so forth. And we don't have that kind of creature today. We do have the Bombardier Beetle. Anybody ever hear of the Bombardier Beetle? The Bombardier Beetle is a pretty cool little beetle because he's got like 2 little tanks in his tail end. When he gets threatened or angry, these 2 little tanks in his tail end are filled with 2 different kinds of liquid. And he just kind of shoots it out of his tail end. And when those liquids combine in the air after they leave his body, they explode. And so if you're like a unsuspecting dog or cat or anything else that decides to have a Bombardier Beetle for lunch, probably not going to work out so well for you, okay? Go out there, it's funny, go out to YouTube and just Google in YouTube the Bombardier Beetle and you'll see some pretty cool things. But anyway, so there probably existed, I'm saying probably, I believe that actually existed a creature that we would refer to as a dragon today. But this is not a real dragon. Again, this is a wonder, this is a sign, it's a vision. But very clearly as we get through the passage, you're going to find out that it is the devil, because in Revelation 12:9 it says, and the great dragon which was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So, we'll stop here today. Know this, the dragon definitely symbolizes the devil. He's called that very clearly in verse 9, which we'll get down to that in our studies. And so we'll stop there. Any questions or comments on what we covered? No? Good. Again, usually when you get questions in something like this, it's going to be something really hard. So
I would just add this.
I knew it. I knew there would be a question.
Talk about the time frame. Clearly, we're currently in a continuous time frame. That when you said it's for a great time, this is together.
Right. So what we got the tribulation, which is 7 years. But now we got Israel, and we're going way back before the 7 years, all the way back to, to Jacob, going all the way back to Joseph and the dream he had. Okay, so a lot of time there. We got the dragon, the devil. How far back does he go? Well, pretty far. He goes back before creation, actually. And so we'll talk more about that next week. Anyone else? Okay, let's close in prayer, and Brother Duke closes in prayer, and then we'll be dismissed, and you got about 12 minutes or 13 minutes till church time.
Oh, Father, thanks for the wonderful things and also thanks for learning your word. Help us to be more faithful and obedient to rest in the service of heaven. All we ask for guidance and grace, all of us is service.
In Jesus' presence, loving name, we pray.